Well, it's noon, so we're going to get started. So welcome to the Build Your Influence Through Stories webinar, and my guest, Amanda Marko. I see we have a lot of Charleston people. I see Becky, Courtney, Erica Grace. Joe Ferris is someone, whoops, usually don't say last names, but we have somebody from your side of the Kentucky-Ohio border. And we have someone from Pennsylvania. We have Kirsten. Clara is from the Los Angeles area, I know. So we have quite a nice group. Welcome to our webinar. It's going to be fast and furious, and I'm going to start off by sharing. I always like to share the story of how we got to be here, especially, you know, Amanda and I, we met virtually almost 4 years ago. We have a common friend named Sarah Sophia who lives in Charlotte, and Sarah Sophia is an event planner, and she and I met at a breakfast at a Southern Sea, which is a group of Southern women entrepreneurs in the lifestyle industry. It's a lot of retail, wedding, very pretty industries, photographers, not my people usually, but I have so much fun with them. I try to go like every other year. And so I met Sarah Sophia, and telling her about my business, she said, oh, you need to meet Amanda Marko. So Amanda and I had a nice conversation, and she told me about her storytelling business, and we exchanged messages here and there and here. And Amanda reached out. LinkedIn LinkedIn,
social media.
Yeah, we're connected. And she reached out to me a few months ago, probably, I think it was maybe October. And I said, hey, why don't you, would you have time to be a guest on this webinar? And she said, yes. And I was so excited because I know she's like the thing with storytelling, and I am not. My most famous article is about messaging for non-storytelling, but that may change now.
We're gonna update that one, I think, now.
Exactly. And so last week I was just checking Amanda's profile to get her exact title down, and it turns out she's in Cincinnati, and I was in Cincinnati over the weekend to visit my daughter Miranda, and Amanda and I had lunch, and I learned how to tell a story. So before we get started, I'm just going to share one of the stories. We came up with 3 in our lunch together.
In about half an hour, and you came into the lunch saying, I am not a storyteller. I don't have any stories. I can't do this. And I said, there's no way, between their professional career you've had, all the clients that you've worked with and those interactions, let alone those clients and the things that have happened to them, the reasons why they came to you and the issues that they were working through, you've got more stories than you probably know what to do with. So,
oh, for sure.
Right.
Yes.
So what did I do? How did I get you to tell the story?
Well, she gave me some prompts. And then the prompts, like I was still like, no, like she was asking something about getting feedback maybe, and I say no. And then it turned out that was part of my story, that I was had worked kind of as an independent agent in Venezuela and for a small publications company. And I mean, I got feedback like, this is good, I don't like this, do this, change that, but never like a sit down formal, this is what you've done well, this is what you need to work on, until year 2000. I actually in 1990, late 90s, I started working at East Carolina University. And over the 9 years I worked there, I had 7 different bosses. And only one of them, or maybe 2, but just one that I remember, Dr. Dennis Calley, who is an extraordinary communication scholar and teacher. He was chair of the department until University of Texas Tyler lured him away. But he's a tremendous recognized scholar and actually a great leader. And he gave me an amazing performance review. And he pointed out things that I thought were true about myself as a teacher, but I wasn't sure. He pointed out that I had a very creative approach in my teaching, and that I had a good relationship with the students. And that was almost 20 years ago. I still have it. I have a copy of it. And it's just like one of those standout moments of the importance and value of feedback from your boss and how it can impact your life. And then probably that has indirectly, gave me the confidence to go out and start my own company. So
good. You've been working, you practiced it since we talked too, so it's gotten even better. So, I mean, the fact that we started that conversation, you said, I have no stories. I asked you a few questions. And even as I was asking you the questions, I was asking you, has there ever been a time when you received feedback from a boss? Have you ever, and you kept saying, no, that's never happened. That's never happened. Kept saying no. And I kept asking, and then you got to the point where you said, well, there was this one boss. And so once you remembered, I think Dennis, right? Once you remembered your boss, Dennis, that whole story came flooding back to you about what happened and how meaningful that was. And I think it was kind of like in pieces in your brain, because as we kept talking, you kept adding more richness to the story. Like you remembered that you still have a physical copy of it, and these kinds of things got added. Will you put up that slide that I gave you of the story? So I just want to show everybody. So
yes.
The format that I taught Laura. So once we kind of got out what she wanted to, this moment, we're getting at a moment that happened. I showed her this format that I use, that I teach, that shows if you can put those pieces together like this, you've got a story. And what Laura just shared with us exactly follows this framework. So the first thing over on the left is a little picture of a clock, and it's a little picture of like a dropped pin on Google Maps, and it's a little picture of a person. So that's saying that the first thing that you would say in your story is a time, a place, or a person. That is a first signal to let somebody know that you're telling a story. So Laura did that by saying, when I was teaching at Eastern Carolina University, right? That was your first signal that Laura was about to launch into a story. So if you're going to tell a story, that would be the first thing you do, is give it a place, a time. Sometimes we give it a person. So if it's an environment that's familiar, like if it's at work and everybody knows the boss, you might say, well, I was in our boss's office and this happened. So you don't need to necessarily say, but generally you start with a place or a time. And then you have a series of events, causal relationship of events, of her saying that she's never had a review, and then he took her in, he gave her a review, and that gave her feedback that she was able to put to use and remember forever. The next little box, those two people speaking to each other, we need to have people in the story. So it's so easy, especially in a business environment, to want to kind of skip by this part where we get nervous about saying somebody's name, or we think that if we're adding too many details, or we want to protect the guilty, perhaps, in the story. So you need to have people, though, because that makes the story come alive. So to have people in your story, you can do one of two or both of these things. You say their name, and or you have dialogue. That's how you know people, Dennis said this to me. He said, so something specific that was spoken. If in this case it was Dennis had given Laura a review that was so memorable because it was so painfully painful, perhaps she wouldn't want to say his name. So she might just say, I had this boss, let's call him Robert. And so when Robert brought me into the office, he really put me in a situation that I felt humiliated and helpless in, and then would explain what happened there. So you can say, we'll just call him for the purposes of the story. And once you say that once, you can then use the assumed name and use that the rest of the time, and everybody's fine with it. Doesn't bother anybody, but it's okay to say people's names. And then the next little box is the exclamation point. So some kind of surprise, something that's really unexpected. In Laura's story, it was, she set it up that she had never even gotten any reviews out of 7 bosses in 9 years, no reviews. So just getting a review was a little bit of a surprise. And then the fact that she found it so helpful, that was the surprise. So the surprise doesn't have to be something super dramatic. It doesn't, we're not talking Hollywood stories here. We're talking about stories we can use in business. And then it has a business point. So Laura and I, when she told me this story, we talked about different scenarios where she might be able to use this story. And we came up with a couple. And I think that, as she tells different people this story, there might be more ways she could tell the story. Do you have the ability for people to type in feedback, Laura?
Yes, but I
Yeah.
gotta stop
So if anybody listening right now has any idea of a scenario, a situation where Laura could use that story, go ahead and submit it, because she'll be able to, we want to add to her the ability to use a story, because we want to be able to find stories that we can use more than once.
Right. So yeah, just type it in the chat.
Yeah.
Think of a.
Yeah, if you can think of a time or a place that story might be useful. So the way that Laura told it just now, she was talking about not really ever getting feedback and never feeling like she really needed it because she worked really independently. And then when she got it, it turned out it was so helpful and really resonated with her. And so as an independent worker, turns out she did benefit from having feedback.
Right.
And I told her another way maybe she could use it is if you're trying to instill in a leader how powerful their words are. Leaders have the ability when they share information to make that information really lasting, because just from the nature of their position, their authority, people listen a little bit better a lot of times and they carry it with them longer. So those words were really, oh, look at all these good ones. Yeah.
So Courtney asked, put it in the question that she says, encourage her to share feedback with colleagues or employees she has been working for, attributing that for her moving forward. So yes, there was a causal relationship, even if it was just encouragement, like we get too much.
Yeah.
Claudia is saying that this might be good for coaching someone who might be in transition or interviewing. It could be encouragement for bosses to give feedback. Or someone is saying if you're coaching a leader and they don't understand why feedback is important.
Yeah.
So those are all
really good. And so the point here is even more, empower somebody who is seeking feedback. This is so good. So you can see all of these. Laura, you need to write all of these down. So here's the thing. So Laura says she has no stories. We help her find this one story. Now, you don't just want one story that you might be able to use for one really niche situation. Here, she and I came up with a couple, and with the help of this group, we've come up with a few more. And that's the neat thing, is that once you come up with your story, if you share it with somebody else, they're going to perhaps take a little bit of a different impression from it, a different spin. And so you can add all of those to your story, to your point, so that when you are in any one of these kinds of situations, Laura could tell the same exact story. But on that previous slide that we looked at, and it says, end it with your business point. Once you put that business point around your story, you can change and swap that out.
Right.
You tell the same exact story. So what I encouraged Laura to do then is to give this story a name. So the methodology we like to use is like on Friends, where they would name the episodes of Friends, the one where Joey ate the sandwich, something. So we would call this one, the one where Laura finally got feedback. Right. And so you could name it, and then you would put a couple of little bullet points. So just so that it jogs your memory. So Eastern Carolina University, 7 bosses in 9 years, a couple things. And then you're going to remember the story. And then you have this list of business points.
Right. And we got another one. Did you see it?
Yeah.
Number one reason why people leave companies is they don't feel anybody appreciates them. Yes, that is so true. They can make showing that appreciation, that kind of feedback can make the difference between keeping and losing an employee. And the thing is, now all of you can use this story.
That's right. Yeah, you can. So yes, you can definitely use someone else's story. So Laura's going to keep all of this. She likes to use Excel spreadsheets. I don't know why anybody likes to use Excel spreadsheets, but Laura does.
For everything.
I know you do. You're crazy. So, but I personally use Evernote, or if you have any other kind of record keeping thing that's on your phone or your iPad, whatever you keep with you easily, then you can, again, Evernote's nice because you can hashtag the story too. So in that, I could hashtag it feedback, hashtag leadership, hashtag, employee engagement. And I could put a bunch of things in there so that over time, as I build my story bank, I can search for it. And Laura was just telling me about a presentation she's getting ready to give. And she would be able to just type in into her story bank those keywords and find stories that might be applicable to her to the presentation she's about to give. So that's how we build up our story bank.
It's so important because you will forget. In fact, every time I talk to Amanda, her first question is, have you come up with new stories? Yeah. So that's a good question to ask your team if you're interested in developing that storytelling ability in your team, is to ask them. And then when she asked me earlier today, I said yes. Yesterday while I was preparing for this webinar a class on culture and communication, I had come up with a story, but I couldn't remember what it was. So that's why it's important to keep a record. So
write it down and practice saying it out loud.
Yes.
And, because remember I said we pulled the story together while we were over lunch, and then you practiced it with your daughter and you practiced it with your husband. And so now it flowed. So you practiced it a couple of times and it just came out of you like perfection, right? You didn't stumble over it. You felt really comfortable.
Like I heard this great storyteller. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you just felt, because you felt comfortable saying it. You knew what points to emphasize, and you knew how it fit together, and you also knew why you were saying it. Sometimes we start telling a story where we halfway through ourselves are wondering why am I saying this right now? And then all your listeners are wondering too. So that's why we always, in business, when we tell a story, we make sure to include a business point. We're not just telling a funny story, we're telling a story for a reason.
Right. And I think when you're developing content or a presentation, you've taught me to like, where is this story? And it may take you a while, but if you keep working with it. But
yeah. Do you want to put up that offer too, that we just to let them know now? So I was asking Laura some really specific questions, and that's how we get to find these stories that we all have, is that we want to get to a moment. So instead of saying the slide with the offer on it, I think that one. So instead of just saying, well, it happens all the time that when a boss says something to me, I remember what they say. Okay, well, so we want to get to that exact moment in time of when that's happened. And so to do that, we ask really specific questions to try to bring you in your mind to a moment so that you can uncover a story. And this ebook, which I'm happy to send, we might just blast it out to everybody who's registered for the for this today. I'll send it, so we'll get it sent to you. So it has 170 questions in it, and they're all designed to help you tell a story. So they're designed to help you find the stories that you have within you, and they're categorized by all kinds of, useful topics for reasons why you might need to tell a story, to demonstrate different attributes and skills like trust, or demonstrate, the importance of feedback, or any of these kinds of topics. So this is something that you'll get to help you find or use the questions to get to stories.
Yes, and tell us, like, how does this ability to tell stories, how does it build influence? And tell us some of the specific ways people can use stories. We talked about dealing with negativity or finding out what's really going on. So speak to how that storytelling skill helps you professionally.
Sure. So when we learn this, it is a skill. It's not an art. I showed you the formula, right? And then, so it's developing the skill so that you can be a more impactful leader. People remember what you say in a presentation. They're very likely that the people that you're giving a presentation to are going to remember the story that you told and not much else. Right. So we had, one of my colleagues was at a conference, and the person before him gave a very long, bullet point heavy presentation. And when my colleague's turn was to go up and speak and was talking about storytelling, he asked the audience what they remembered from that last presentation. I mean, this was a nationally known speaker. He gives keynotes all the time, but his entire presentation was bullet points, and nobody in the audience could remember really anything.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. And so, so that's but that's how we tend to communicate in business. We feel comfortable, we feel safe using these, but it's not effective. So if you just use a story, I teach this, is through a program called Storytelling for Leaders. And this is the workbook that goes with it. And I was teaching this to a group that included a guy from Atlanta, Aaron. He worked for a big company down there, and he previously worked for Coca-Cola. And at Coca-Cola, they had a development program for graduate students, or for students just graduating from college, that they would go through a 2-year rotation and get exposure to all the different parts of Coca-Cola. So when Aaron got to his new company, he wanted to create that kind of program there, and he pitched it to the CFO, who had told him no, that was not going to happen, that was not going to fly, and he couldn't have the budget for it. And when I met with Aaron and did this one-day workshop with him to teach him storytelling for leaders, during the workshop, I'm really intent on finding things that are going on with everybody at work at that moment, that they will be able to use the stories right away when they get back. So Aaron told me about this situation, and during the course of the day, we worked on a story for him that he would be able to tell, because he just so happened the following week, he was going to have a chance to present his plan for the next year, his strategic plan for the next year, in front of the entire executive team, including the CFO. So we worked out his story. He emailed me the following Tuesday, and he said, I gave my presentation yesterday and I got unanimous approval for my graduate program, including the CFO.
That
the
is
difference
so
between
good.
him trying to tell the CFO to do it versus him presenting it with a story in a story format was the difference between getting that program going and not. So that's how you're a leader. You develop your reputation as a leader by having a series of successes. And how do you have a series of successes? You have to be able to effectively communicate.
Right.
And I would contend that in your arsenal of being an effective communicator is being able to tell stories. Is it the only thing? No, of course not. Is it?
No, but just from a communication, stickiness point of view, as far as what people remember, has to deal with emotion, and getting, bullet points are not usually invoking emotions.
Right.
And emotions are what persuade people. And
Right.
That's the point of connection.
Yeah. We think that we're rational human beings.
Right.
We have this trick in our head that we've convinced ourselves that we're rational, but nothing we do is rational, right? You go to buy a car and you're like, yeah, but before I lived here, I lived in central Pennsylvania. On the top of a mountain, on the top of a steep driveway was perched my house. And I drove, and in central Pennsylvania that got all kinds of snow, and I drove a convertible. Little tiny convertible, where a few months of the year I could not get down my driveway. But I didn't care. I wanted that car. I liked it a lot. But when the weather was nice and the top was down, it looked good. So I was happy, right? We don't make rational decisions. So, we need to understand that, but we also know that we are in business and there are facts and there's money involved and there's important decisions being made using data, statistics. And so we can complement that information that appeals to that part of the brain with the story. So we're not just telling stories to try to trick people. We're not telling lies, but we're sharing the story and adding the emotion into the business situation, because we are emotional people and that is how we make decisions. And yes, we are going to still be backed up by facts, and we're not going to try to convince somebody to do something that would be a bad business decision, but we're appealing to them in a way that resonates.
Well, yes, and what you're saying applies to communicate. I mean, being a skilled communicator can be used for good or evil. I mean, history is full of great communicators who did terrible things with that. If you have questions, you need to be typing those in. You can type them in the chat or the Q&A. Amanda, can you speak? We mentioned like using stories to find out what's really going on.
Yeah. So that's exactly that. We call them anti-stories. So the anti-story are the stories that other people are telling that are counter to the story you're trying to tell. So if you're trying to institute a change in your organization and everybody else is saying, we've already tried this before, it didn't work, or there's not a good idea, but we're not putting enough resources behind it, or what, those are all examples of anti-stories. Those are the stories that people are telling that are counter to the story you're trying to tell. Mm-hmm. And they always are going to exist in the organization. You're going to have the skeptics, but you want to try to win them over. And one of the ways to do that is to identify what the anti-stories are, to be cognizant that this is going to happen, identify what the anti-stories are. And one of the ways you can do that is by asking those questions that are like in that book. You want to find out what's really happening and why people think what they think. And then when it's your turn to present, to try to persuade, to convince, to announce a change, you are going to acknowledge those anti-stories. Not ignore them. You're going to say straight out, yeah, I know we tried this before a few years ago and it didn't work then. And that's because of this. But now it is going to work because we're doing it differently. We learned from that, or whatever the anti-story is. But just pull the wind out of their sails.
Right. That's like addressing a sales objection ahead of time. So we have 2 questions, and I'm going to switch to the slide because John wants you to run through the story timeline, and Claire wants to know if the story needs to have humor. So let me pull up the slide. You can answer both of those.
Okay, yep. I think, no, the story doesn't have to have humor, but Laura mentioned an important word, emotion. So any kind of emotion is fine, and particularly strong emotion. Giving people a strong emotional words as prompts is really helpful. So can you remember a time that you were really embarrassed or disgusted, frustrated? Those kinds of strong emotional words help people come up with stories. And so any kind of emotion inducing story, whether it's humor or disgust or otherwise. So the former governor of Ohio, I used to work in politics, and George Voinovich was governor and then senator, and he was a senator while I was working for a different senator from Ohio. Anyway, George Voinovich was a famous penny pincher. He was famous budget hawk. I mean, he made his career on this and won a lot of awards and recognition for being this budget hawk. Famously, on the night of his inauguration, dressed in a tuxedo, he went into the restroom before going out to give his inaugural address or dance or whatever he was supposed to do at the event, and noticed a penny in the urinal, grabbed it out of there, washed it off in the sink, and stuck it in his pocket. So he was such a penny pincher that he would even dressed in a tuxedo, he would. So, that's a story where it demonstrates his personality, and it's a true story verified by reporters, but it is kind of gross, right? So it gives an emotion. It's emotion inducing. You've got that memory, that idea, that picture of somebody grabbing a penny out of a urinal, and you won't forget it. And he really is careful about money, that one. For sure. So any emotion is fine. Humor is fun. Everybody likes funny, but it doesn't have to be funny.
Yeah, and sometimes if you're laying off people, there's not the time.
That's not the right emotion, right? Yeah. Yeah, the right emotion for the right situation. So the symbols again on this real quick are the first block over on the left is the clock. So either a time, a place, or a person. So the time could be last week or when I was in college. Those could be times. Places could be at the office or at home or wherever, in the boardroom, or a person that everybody is familiar with. And then the next one is a series of events, a series of causal events that happened in a sequential order of things. And then the next one is people. There's people in your story. They talk, they have names. Put people in your story. And then the last one over there is the surprise, something that is unexpected, something that is an aha, something that you didn't quite see coming. And it does not have to be dramatic. We're not doing, this isn't a Netflix series. And then it has a business point. And so you go into your story saying a business point, and you can wrap it up with the business point too. But you need to have that business point. The business point at the beginning lets people know it's kind of that transition between what we were just talking about and the story you're about to tell. So you don't just totally change this. People think you're totally changed the subject. So you say, that is, you're right. Feedback really is important. When I was a professor at Eastern Carolina University, I went 9 years without feedback.
Right. All right. So do you have any more questions? Well, I'm going to, somebody says, John says, thank you so much. He was the one that wanted to see you run through the timeline. Okay. And of course you will get a recording of this so you can watch it again. And Amanda's going to get us this these questions
Yeah.
to ask, not only for ourselves, I think for the people that, I mean, if you're working on a team, you want everybody to develop that skill. And of course, Amanda, why don't you tell them how they can work with you?
Sure, I do. The main way to access this training is through this program called Storytelling for Leaders. And it was developed by two really sharp guys in Australia, and I'm part of the global network. I'm actually the first person in the US that was certified by them to deliver this. So the program is one day. It's I just got off working with a couple of really big companies like Unilever, Mars, but we've done this program all over the world in multiple languages. The materials are available. So we do a one-day workshop, and then we do 6 months of staying with you to help you continue to practice the skill. So that coaching is also certainly a way, one-on-one, if an executive coaching situation is something you would prefer, I can do that. And I've been running these as a pilot program. So if it's something you think you might want to bring to your organization in a limited way, we could talk about something limited too. Just to get started. Thanks.
All right. So John, another John who has offices in Charleston and Florida says, you know, as you can see, thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you for showing up. Thank you all for showing up. And well,
my pleasure.
Yes.
There's so much more to do. Maybe we can come back in a few months and cover a different part of it, because there's so much.
Yes, I think that would be great. Yeah, thank you, Courtney. It was really good, and because I didn't even get to share all my stories.
I know. We did tell. I wanted to make sure we told stories, so we did each tell some stories today. But yeah, there's so many more.
We did. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura. Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye-bye.